Alright, so today we're going to go into banded squats, bench, and deadlifts. And one of the things that I love the most about like using bands for the big threes is to help you out with technique. And number one, the first thing you're going to notice for the squats is the fact that the bands are going to be constantly pulling the weight down on top of the weights that I already have on the bar. So you can think of it as like adding a disadvantage to one of your lifts, and the better you get at this disadvantage, the easier your regular squat without the bands are going to be. So in this particular case, the bands are going to be pulling down on the weights, making 335 pounds way heavier than it should be. So the tension on the bar on my back is going to be terrible. So one of the things that it helps me practice is really learning how to squeeze my back. So what I do is I literally try to squeeze my upper back as tight as I can, and where you see the green line is kind of where I put the barbell, kind of like in the middle of my traps where my rear delts and everything's at. And I try to keep this upper back as tight as possible, because if I don't, the bands are going to slam the weights into my body. So I want to learn how to practice that, squeeze my upper back as tight as I can as I set up, because if I don't, the weights are going to slam into my face. The next thing you're going to probably notice is just literally me having to control my walkout. So as you watch, every step that I take is very crucial, because again, this is 335 pounds. If I'm not careful with each step that I take, the weights are going to slam me down. So not only am I constantly worrying about how tight my upper back is so the weights don't crush me, I also got to take into consideration how many steps, how crucial of a step, how far of a step, how wide of a step, how many steps can I take in order to take the least amount of steps possible to get me set up, because I want to literally set up, squat, and then just put the weights back as soon as possible. That way I don't waste any energy and I can focus more of my strength towards the actual lift itself. Now the next thing we're going to worry about is bar path, okay? So the idea of you squatting is to try to squat in the straightest path possible. So one of the reasons why the bands are very helpful in this aspect is because you're not going to set up perfect every time, and at the same time the bands are going to be pulling you straight down. So if you don't have all the other stuff like your upper back tightness, your walkout, and then your bar path down, the bands are going to pull you into different places that you aren't used to, and it's going to cause a lot of bad things to happen, like you falling forward and things like that. So the idea is you want to be able to utilize the tension of the bands and try to mimic your normal squat as possible by staying in that straight line, the green line, as straight as possible in all three aspects of your lifts: the beginning, when you hit the bottom, and when you lock out. And the bands really emphasize each of these phases. So if you don't really know which part of these you're weak at, or which muscle groups involved in that motion that's causing these little tweaks here and there in your techniques, then the bands will let you know, and that's where you need to go after your regular squats and really hammer those weaknesses down. Like for example, if you have a hard time coming out of the hole, or if your chest caves forward, you got to ask yourself, like, why is the bands causing, I don't know, 50% of my squat, 50% of my 1 rep max squat to fall forward? So that means you need to train whatever causes you to not fall forward. That way in the future, when it gets heavier on your regular squats, you won't fall forward. And that's why the bands are so good. They teach you a lot about what you suck at and what you need to work on. Alright, so for the bench press, it's very similar. If you're not creating that upper back tightness that we also mentioned within the squat, and create this very strong platform for you to push the weights away from you, you're going to really see the weakness in your upper back when the bands want to literally just pull the weight or pull the bar into your chest. So the bands teach you literally how to stay very tight as you set up with your technique. So if there's any weaknesses or any holes within your technique, you're gonna definitely see it with the bands. I really like just honestly benching with the bands on without any weights. Because when you bench like this, you know, you can see like all the shakiness that's going on. It really reinforces you squeezing the bar, because this isn't heavy by any means, but it's very difficult because the bar wants to move in so many different places, and you, the individual, have to squeeze the bar and make the weight or the movement move to your will. So again, a very big emphasis on technique with the bands. The bands are going to pull down. It's going to make me really focus on keeping my upper back tight, really taking a deep breath into my stomach, and really having to drive the weight away from me against the bands. Because the bands, again, you know, all the shaky stuff, right? It wants to take the weights in many different ways, but you as the individual have to learn how to squeeze the bar and drive the weight away from you. And this can really help, you know, put more emphasis on your chest training. So, you know, if you're a bodybuilder as well, you know, this is a very good way to kind of add more of that pump factor if you're looking for it. Really help a lot of power lifters or people who are going through strength plateaus to really break through some of that weakness that you have off your chest. Really help you fine tune technique. All right, so for deadlifts, I love using bands to help out with my lockout strength. So if you ever had like any issues locking out the weight, or if it looks kind of fishy, if you got like some red lights because your knees aren't fully locked, or if you have some troubles honestly in your squats even for locks out, where your knees are kind of soft, adding the bands to your deadlifts, either sumo or conventional, would really help emphasize on the lockout strength of your deadlifts and the lockout strength of your squats. And, you know, again, if you're a bodybuilder, or, you know, if you're just trying to get like a lot more emphasis on glute and hamstrings, just adding the bands in general, you don't even need a lot of weight. I only have about 300 something pounds on the bar, and this is already very challenging for me, because when I lift the weights, the tension gets heavier at the top, so I really have to squeeze my glutes into place, because if I don't, again, the weights are going to just want to slam right back into the floor. So this really helps me focus on squeezing my glutes and emphasize that further by even holding the weight at the top for like 2 or 3 seconds, because it sucks up there, so we might as well make the lift even harder than it should be. As you notice, I have 2 mats on the floor. This is to further emphasize my personal weakness on my deadlifts. So I've been having a lot of issues locking out, and I also want to practice my own technique by making it even more difficult than it should be by adding a deficit and then having 2 mats on top of each other. So as you look, the mats are together, but as I continue to pull, the mats are going to slowly spread apart. And again, that adds like another disadvantage to my deadlifts, on top of the fact that the bands want to pull the weights down. So it makes the lockout and my position very unstable, and it helps me work on what makes my deadlift weak.